Hello, how is everyone? Hello, Stephanie. Hello, Dr. Palmer. I really hope that you guys are doing well. This is certainly an interesting time in history, and despite it all, we have to persevere and we have to continue and study and teach and do everything that we're doing. So without further ado, I will transition into chapters 6 and 7 of leadership and the leadership experience. And again, as you already know, I love this textbook. It's the best textbook that I've ever taught from. And what I particularly like about these chapters is that it does talk about courage and followership. And I think one of the biggest impacts or imprints that students have when they read these chapters is the importance and the relevancy of followership, and knowing that your role as a follower is equally, if not just as important, as that of a leader. And in order to transition into a leader, being a really effective follower and having the ability to lead up to help your managers, your CEOs, and to be that resource is just so valuable and so important. So again, in chapter 6 and 7, we look at those variables. And the questions that you posed this week were the following. Question 6 from chapter 6. One finding is that when leaders are under stress, so that fear and risk increase, they tend to revert to authoritarian command and control style. And the question here is, as a leader, how much you find the courage to resist this tendency? I found this question particularly interesting for this week, for this semester, for 2020, for March of 2020, and of course for April of 2020, because we have a lot of individuals with leadership roles, leadership positions, and the way in which they're exerting their power, their authority. You can see fear in some of them, and you can see courage in others. And so when we look at this question for chapter 6, we have to look at courage and what is courage. And as defined in our textbook, this is the mental and moral strength to engage in, persevere through, and withstand danger, difficulty, and fear. And so just before we transition, we have to lead with courage. Okay, and so that's, what we're talking about here. Lead with courage as opposed to fear. And I love this image of a cat being fearless like a lion. Transitioning now, I wanted to briefly allude to a leader who is, in my opinion, leading with courage. As we all watch the news, sometimes I feel when I turn on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, whatever channel it is, sometimes I have to stop and think for a second, because it's all about New York, New York, New York, New York. And if you recall, not only am I from New York, but I'm from Queens, New York, and we're here in the epicenter of this epidemic. And so every day, the president has his reports. Our mayor, Bill de Blasio, has these reports because we are in New York City. And then Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, has his daily reports as well. Even today on a Sunday, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, spoke. And I really do think that he adheres and takes heart of leading with courage versus fear. And so when we look at how do you define this, or what does this look like in real day life, we see these 5 variables listed here. So number 1, they accept responsibility. So in this case, and I thought it would be easier, more relevant to provide an actual example through an individual who's on the news all the time across the United States to relate to him. So again, he saw an issue, he saw it coming, he realized that New York City, we were not prepared. And he took on that responsibility to assume such responsibility and work relentlessly to ensure that we had 2,500 beds at the Javits Center in downtown Manhattan. He worked relentlessly with other leaders to ensure that we had ventilators, and he still works relentlessly and takes that responsibility to make sure that we as New Yorkers, heaven forbid, if we need the care, that we get the care. Also, when you look at these, what does courage mean? It's nonconformity. It's going against the grain. And I truly do believe that Cuomo has gone against the grain. A lot of politicians and even some senators are not upholding or enforcing, stay in your, home. He was one of the first. He was the first to say, you guys need to cancel school. You need to stay in your homes. You need to refrain. You need to social distance. And he went against the grain when it wasn't popular, because now we see that all these states are following suit. But he, as the New York governor, really took the lead in ensuring that he went first. And that meant that it wasn't the norm. It wasn't something other people were doing. Because of his leadership and because of his courage, he had the ability to inspire other leaders to follow suit and to conform. But in essence, it was his nonconformity that was really helpful and influential for New Yorkers. The next one, number 3, is going beyond your comfort zone. Again, I'm assuming that you guys have seen the news, but this is a really difficult situation for everybody, and especially for him. And I didn't actually know that his brother, his brother actually is a reporter for CNN, and he got COVID-19, and made the situation really personal for him. And so in his examples, he has gone out of his comfort zone. He has shared his personal life. He has shared his personal story while still trying to be a strong leader. Number 4, asking for what you want and saying what you think. Now, this one is really difficult in a political framework. If you think of politicians, you got to play a game. It's a game. But I do applaud him because he is asking for what he wants and what the state needs, what the city needs. And while he is saying what he thinks, he's gotten himself into a little bit of trouble, but he has the ability to play the game so that for the most part, he can get what he needs from the federal government. And fighting for what you believe, I find him quite admirable, which is really funny because before this whole situation, I wasn't a fan. I was not a fan of Cuomo's. A couple of months ago, he wanted to change the license plate, and there was this vote, and it was rigged so that we'd all pick the Cuomo Bridge. I can't recall which bridge he wants to rename the Verrazano in his name. So again, until this came to light, I think it's really interesting that he's stepped up, that he's reflected all these values that we see in courage, and that he does fight for what he believes. And I thank him that he believes in New York and the safety of New Yorkers. So just transitioning from chapter 6 to chapter 7, the chapter describes 5 ways in which followers need to use courage. Which do you feel is most important, and which do you feel is least important? And how might a follower define and derive the courage to behave in new ways to be more effective leaders? So again, when we look at chapter 7, the entire chapter is about ways in which you can influence, you can motivate, you can inspire your CEOs, your leaders, your bosses, but doing it in an effective and a meaningful way. And so the examples they have are the courage to assume responsibility is the first one. And again, this one is really important. We have to, as individuals who are followers, we have to adhere to the best practices of the organization and the mission of the organization and keep that in our mindset. And so the courage to assume responsibility and also for our actions is just really, really important. The second one is the courage to challenge. And we can, believe it or not, we can challenge upward. Again, if we're mindful, if we're thoughtful, if we're reflective of the goals, organizational missions, goals and objectives, we do have a responsibility to challenge authority or to challenge process. There could be an HR issue, or you could see that fellow workers aren't being treated fairly. You have a responsibility to challenge what is going on for the greater good, for the organizational's goals and missions. The courage to participate in transformation. This one I think is really hard for people, especially when individuals get really comfortable with where they are, what role they have in the organization. And I can tell you, for me personally, I think this was the hardest one for me, yet the most important one. And actually, I'm going to rescind that a little bit. It's definitely, I think, one of the most important ones for me, particularly, not necessarily the most challenging, and we'll get to that one later. But basically, a couple of years ago, I had switched positions within an organization of which I worked in for 12 years. And the dean of the business school wanted me to go back into enrollment management as the leader to revitalize and to revise and to revamp graduate admissions. And the school was transforming. There were new ideas, goals, objectives. But I had already left this position as well and had a different professional trajectory. However, knowing that my leader needed my insight, my knowledge, my skill set to transition and successfully transform graduate admissions, I did transition back into that role, into that position to help my leader. So certainly the most important recently in my situation. The courage to serve, again, people clock in and clock out, but the power, the ability, the courage to say, and to go above and beyond and say, you know what, boss, I'm here for you. I'm here to serve. Again, not only your boss, but the organization's missions, goals, values is really important. And then the most difficult one that I've had to deal with is the courage to leave. And so for this same organization, after 12 years of loving the organization of which I worked, it was a difficult decision, but I decided to leave because leadership had changed, and those values and the mission of the organization and the specific jurisdiction was changing and evolving, and it was something that I had a really hard time adhering to. And so knowing that, I had the courage, and I took the courage to leave. Now, as for which one is the least important, is again, it's very subjective, but objectively, they're all very important. I think maybe if I were to rank them, I would rank number 2, the courage to challenge, as the lowest one, because that comes through with experience and evolution. And so once you serve, once you assume responsibility, once you take part in transformation, you do have the ability, or you feel more comfortable to challenge. So in terms of evolution, I would definitely say that's probably that one, and the courage to leave are the last ones, the final ones in this scenario. So that was that question, and that was the last page. Again, reflective of managing, the courage to manage up. So I thank you for listening to me today, and Stephanie and Dr. Palmer. I really do hope that you and your family are safe and well and healthy, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you and just get out of my daily rut and to just talk about things, leadership and courage and followership, topics that are so important and that I love to talk about. So thank you for that. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.